Hello guys, Ping Yao here. Welcome to episode number 12 of New Falmouth. And we've got a interesting little episode today. It's going to be a bit of everything happening today. We've got a bit of expansion to the city, marina, some parks. Just general good stuff. So what we're doing, we're working on this area by the river. It's a pocket of land which runs along beside the river between North End district and I guess part of where the swing bridge is, where the road bridge comes across the river to connect to this side. It's a kind of mixed area. You've got a lot of residential houses, a little kind of industrial area just to the south here, but it is predominantly a kind of residential neighbourhood. Reasonably nice area right by the river here, and of course the other thing is we've got this railway that runs through the centre of this neighbourhood. So the area is called Lilyville, which is named after my daughter because she wanted to have an area of the city named after her, so I thought I'd call this Lilyville. And it's it's quite a nice sort of location if you're going to live in New Falmouth, I guess. I just want you to have a look at this tree before I get any closer. This is a new release by Mr. Mason, and look at the detail on these leaves. It's just absolutely amazing. This is my new favourite tree, and it's a horse chestnut tree. Just absolutely incredible tree. I mean, the detail of some of these trees, I mean, P. Delmo and Mr. Mason are just producing some astonishing work, I think, and it really, really does add to the city. Once you take away some of those vanilla trees, it just looks amazing. Okay, so let's get back to the build. What I am doing with Lilyville is a kind of main street with some shops, a small commercial strip of shops here. Nothing major, nothing too exciting. It's very much a kind of local community shopping district, and predominantly Victorian homes. So it's going to be turn of the century residential area, a little bit like the North End district from a few episodes back, but if anything, just slightly more, not rural as such, but slightly less densely populated, I guess. It's quite a green area is what I'm trying to say. It's got quite a lot of trees, and there is a little bit of sort of parkland and some open space that you'll see later on, but it is predominantly a kind of low density sort of residential neighbourhood, and quite a nice spot to live. The river that you can see, just a glimpse in the background there, obviously the river makes it quite a nice spot to sort of live, but the river itself is not the most scenic position in this part of the city, because it is opposite the oil depot and the power plant. So you'll see later on in some of the cinematics how it sort of fits in with the rest of the city, but it's not the most picturesque spot. But nevertheless, it's still kind of by the river, so I'm guessing the houses here would have been quite nice houses when they were first built. It might have come down a little bit over the years, and it is also, oddly enough, a little bit out of the way of the city centre, even though you could probably walk to the old town in about 20 minutes from this area. It somehow feels quite separate from the centre of New Falmouth. Which in some respects might make it quite sought after, because it's got more of a kind of rural feel to it and quite a lot of trees and so forth. But it is also just a little bit out of the city. But I think it's actually not a bad place to live. if you were going to move to New Falmouth. And I must say, I am really enjoying the New Falmouth build. It is really kind of starting to take shape now, and in fact this episode is a really kind of strong indicator of the direction I think the city is going to be moving. It is very much a kind of modest small town America type of style that I think I'm going for with New Falmouth. The more I build it, the more it seems to be going in that direction. It's strange with these projects, I find, I mean, this is going to sound a little pretentious, but I find with the game that when you start a city, it almost starts to take on a life of its own. It almost starts to develop a kind of atmosphere and a vibe, which is a little strange, but I think it's probably just the mixture of using particular assets like these little Victorian houses, which I think are fantastic. And I really do need to find out who made these, and I might put that up on the video, because I'm using these a lot recently, and in fact they're my new favourite house type. I think these fit in really well in this neighbourhood. And also it's the kind of the theme and the kind of textures that you can use on the landscapes. They're using the theme, and all that sort of comes together. And things like trees make a big difference. If you want to use a lot of sort of coniferous trees like fir trees and so forth, then it creates a more kind of northern climate feel than if you use lots of palm trees, obviously, which would become more tropical. So you can create the kind of atmosphere and the vibe just through the use of trees. And as I say, this area, as you can see, is pretty heavily treeified, if that's even a word, which it isn't. Now, the riverbank here, this is obviously on the shores of the Falmouth River, which is the river that runs through the kind of the city, or certainly along the edge of the city, and divides the main city from the kind of industrial side on the opposite bank there. It's quite a wide river at this section, and I felt I probably needed to put just a little bit more kind of life into the riverbank, which is why I'm going to build a little kind of marina area here. This is not a major build, not a major marina, but it is still a little kind of boat area for locals to have their yachts and their speedboats and things to be moored. And it's quite nice to sort of fill out some of the riverbanks with these kind of details. I find when I'm looking at Google Earth, just sort of fired it up the other day and started to zoom around kind of Maine and Connecticut and places like that, just looking at the coastal towns just to see some of the details that they've, some of the things they've got. And so many of them have got these little kind of private marinas and jetties and things with boats moored. I mean, literally thousands of boats moored along the coast. And that's something I'm thinking about doing more in this city, just to try and give it a little bit more life, I think. If anything, I find with New Falmouth, it's somehow lacking a little bit in terms of life. The streets are fairly quiet, which is probably because there's not really very much commerce and shops and things in the city yet. It's mainly houses and sort of small industries and things. So I think I'll try to just give it a little bit of a bigger city vibe, even though it's still kind of like a small town American feel. I would like to give it just a little bit more life. I think that would help. But getting back to this little pier that I'm building here, this is all part of the marina complex, this kind of local marina. As I say, nothing major, but I am sort of using a similar kind of setup to how I'm generally building now, which is using a combination of the ploppable surfaces. In this case, I think it was ploppable pavement, and also the network walls, just to sort of build a kind of dock sort of or harbour wall there. And then if you can combine that with some of these jetties and things, I think it looks pretty good, really. I mean, it's not complex work, but I think it generally looks all right. But I quite enjoy these sort of builds, just detailing up marinas and things. It's a bit I guess it's a little bit different, and I do quite like to add some of these boats and yachts in, which look really cool. I think the thing is with New Falmouth, it's very much a kind of coastal city. It's one of those places that really thrives on its position by the sea, and it would make sense that a lot of people that live in the city also enjoy sailing and going out on the water. So I think it's quite realistic to have lots of little marinas and harbours and things dotted around, and it helps, as I say, just to give it a little bit more life. So, what are we doing here? Well, this is a high school, and you might not recognise it because I've sunk it into the ground. And the reason for that is purely because I didn't want a great big kind of school building in this position. This is the Vanilla High School, I believe, and it's actually quite a big building, in fact. Certainly it looks too tall for this location, so one little trick that I do tend to do, because I needed to have a school here because my education levels aren't great, I tend to put them or sink them into the ground and then cover them up with blobbable surfaces, and I think that you can actually change the appearance of the building quite dramatically by doing that. You can disguise the buildings if you're not keen on them, but you still want them to function. And one particular favourite is the hospital, which is probably my least favourite building in the vanilla game, because I just think it never really fits in very well, that building. It's such a big, sort of ugly looking, weird shaped structure, and it just always looks big. So I do sometimes end up doing things like that, sinking it into the ground and covering it up with ploppable surfaces and things just to disguise it. But it still functions. It doesn't affect the functioning of the building itself, but it does just help to disguise it sometimes. So this little neighbourhood here, which is actually on top of a hill. It's up a hill here. It's a very slight gradient. There's not much of a hill, but it does just break up the kind of flatness of the main part of New Falmouth and almost forms a sort of natural break between the more sort of populated flatter ground and the more sort of hilly area, which is going to be sort of starting here. And what I'm working on is this little kind of park, or what will become like an open space, I guess, more than a park. And I saw something on Google Earth very similar to this, and thought I'd copy. I mean, it was actually a little park in Portland in Maine, and I wanted to try to replicate that particular park in some form. So that was very much the inspiration behind this. I mean, this is not a particularly beautiful build, this park. It's not like a proper, like a formal garden or anything like that. It's just a little kind of open space on the hill here. And the other thing I wanted to do was just to start to introduce some larger buildings, because New Falmouth is not just going to be Victorian homes. There are going to be sort of blocks of flats, condos, and a few sort of taller buildings here and there scattered around before we get to the kind of downtown area. So this, I believe, was some kind of public housing building, which I then sort of converted to PO and edited to make it look more like a private apartment or sort of residential block here up on the top of the hill. And yeah, I mean, again, ended up POing the life out of the thing before I was satisfied with the final look of the building. I added this little kind of, I guess this is like a little kind of carport area here on one side, and just added some walls and doors and shutters and things in to make it look like the garage underneath, and a few little hedges here and there just to finish it off. Nothing complex, but as I say, reasonable level of detail I'm going for with New Falmouth. I'm trying to keep up the detail to a kind of, a standard, I guess, throughout the city. within reason. I mean, there's always a trade-off between expanding the city and the amount of detail that you put in, but I think I'm getting the right sort of balance. I'm not going completely overboard with the detail, but I am putting in certain, or concentrating, let's say, on certain areas a little bit more in terms of the detail, which I think is fine. So I'm adding this. This is kind of the last part of this build, really, this little kind of residential street here, which I guess is going to continue on a bit further. Another episode, I'll probably add a few more houses along the riverbank, which I may decide not to worry about showing you, because a lot of this work is quite repetitive. Just adding some decals and things to the road junctions, which I'm trying to do, although it's fiddly work and it's not my favourite part of the game, but I do think it can help sometimes. Coming up to the end of the episode now, this is the very last thing, which is a little flag I'm putting on. Just watch the cinematic at the end, particularly this big pano shot. It's like well, that's a panoramic shot. So I shall bid you farewell, guys. Stay safe. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already subbed, and please like the video if you've enjoyed it. And I'll see you next time.